Hello, this is Tyler Malloy. The topic that I'm going to be teaching you about is trade with Africa and Asia during the Age of Exploration. I'm going to try to link the URL to the text of this presentation, so look for that below if you want a good source of notes. The reason why I've shown this picture as the first image of my presentation is that I think it encompasses the imperialistic viewpoint that dominated the Age of Exploration. Also, Asia and Africa are on the globe. The trade of slaves with Asia and Africa fueled the Age of Exploration by monetizing exploration and colonization of Africa and Asia. This is because there were many indigenous peoples that could be enslaved. European countries needed slaves to work in the mines and plantations in their growing overseas colonies. This picture is of slaves in the American South. Although they weren't taken into slavery during this time, it's easy to imagine their fathers and grandfathers being taken by the Spanish and the English to work in the Americas. Trade with Africa and Asia was specifically profitable because of the desire for the goods that were being imported from these regions. During the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Empire took control of the land through which the spice trade routes had been formed. The Ottomans placed high taxes on goods traveling through their land. This picture is of the Ottoman Empire during the height of their power. As you can see, their land would cover any possible trade routes south of the Ural Mountains. Gold, ivory, and slave workers came to Europe from Africa. From India and South Asian island nations came spices, cotton, gems, dyes, and sugar. From China came silk, perfume, porcelain, and drugs. Trade with Africa and Asia during the Age of Exploration was also powered by mercantilism. Mercantilism affected trade to Africa and Asia by connecting the trade that went in and out of the country directly to the government. This meant that cities and countries were directly competing with others in their trade to Africa and Asia. With trade in the hands of the government, competition over trading was a huge matter of national interest, and wars or naval battles were not uncommon. As with any form of trade, sea routes were threatened by thieves and hostage-takers. One example of a pirate group that affected trade in northern Africa was the Barbary pirates. This picture is of the capture of a French vessel in the center by two Barbary pirate ships to its left and right. The majority of their rise to power took place during the first half of the 17th century, when they took thousands of captives and slaves and sacked dozens of settlements and cities in the Mediterranean. Barbary pirates were at various times either self-governed or under the command of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Many pirates were paid by the governments of one country to not only leave their ships alone, but also to systematically attack the ships of their economic or political rivals, thus turning them into privateers, such as Sir Francis Drake. The absence of knowledge of the American continents by Europeans led Christopher Columbus to attempt to reach the islands surrounding India by circumnavigating the globe. This attempt to make trade with Southeast Asian countries led to the discovery of the Western Hemisphere, and Columbus's mistake in judging the distance of the Atlantic Ocean turned into an important discovery. Contrary to popular belief, people during the 14th and 15th centuries were not of the widespread opinion that the Earth was flat. Anyone with an education knew that the Earth was spherical. The apprehension in giving funds to Columbus came from the fact that he had misjudged the distance it would take to sail to India around the globe. Had the American continents not been where they were, it would have taken Columbus too long to get to the point where he realized he had made a mistake, and he would have died. One of the wars over trading rights in Africa and Asia was the Dutch-Portuguese War, which took place from 1602 to 1663. Because most of the colonies of Portugal in Asia and Africa were only based on trade, they were very small and did not have the same defenses that a capital city of a country would have. Because the Portuguese colonies were so small, the Dutch believed that they could easily capture them and take control of trade in Asia and Africa away from the Portuguese. There were many parties involved at various parts of the war, but what is important for this topic is the effect on trade in Africa and Asia. Prior to the war, the Portuguese Empire was dominant in Africa and Asia, but during the war some of the colonies were taken over by the Dutch, and nearing the end of the Age of Exploration, Portugal became less of a power because of the war. During the Age of Exploration, technological advances played a major role in the ability for privateers and explorers to navigate the world. This map was drawn by Ptolemy in the 1st century AD, and it was later used by North African and European sailors to navigate the world. Advances in shipbuilding allowed for easier navigation of open ocean. The Portuguese development of the caravel was a major push forward. It was a lighter, three-mast sailing ship with an advanced rudder which allowed it to be much more maneuverable. It also carried more cargo, as well as eliminated the need for slaves to propel the ship. Also, advances in tools made navigation much simpler. The compass, for example, allowed for easier navigation through Ptolemy's geography. Ptolemy's geography was reintroduced by Arab scholars during this time. It was an accurate map of the globe for the time, however, it didn't feature the Americas, making the globe seem much smaller and more navigatable than it actually was. Although much of the Age of Exploration had to do with gaining economic advantages through trade and colonization, like most European history, religion was also a part of it. During this time period, Portuguese and Spanish monarchs sent out voyages and requested that missionaries go along to spread Christianity. This picture is of Francis Xavier, who was one of the missionaries that traveled for Portugal to India. This picture is of Ignatius of Loyola, a Spanish missionary, and Francis Xavier, on the top left and right, with two Chinese evangelicals, Matteo Ricci and Zhu Guangqi. This era wouldn't have been as successful as it was without many of the important figures such as Vasco da Gama, Ferdinand Magellan, and William Jazoon. All three of these men were monumental in the push forward. In 1521, Ferdinand Magellan died in the Philippines in a naval battle against an indigenous people while trying to circumnavigate the globe. Only one of the three ships that he sent out with returned. This picture is of Vasco da Gama's 1499 route to India. He was the first explorer of the time to reach India. This opened up trade to Asia through the sea, which played a major role later on in the Age of Exploration. Willem Jazoon, after exploring the Philippines, became the first European to make landfall in Australia in 1606.